All right, class. This is going to continue our talk on FDR, the New Deal, and we had left off with farmers, and I talked a little bit about the Dust Bowl and some of the efforts that Roosevelt was taken to try to help out these farmers and to help out the situation with the soil, and we had talked about the Agricultural Adjustment Act. We talked about the Civilian Conservation Corps. We talked about the Soil Domestic and Allotment Act, and the Second Agricultural Adjustment Act, trying to limit the problems faced by overproduction, trying to do things that would conserve and replenish nutrients into the soil, and all about trying to help out different segments of the society as far as relief goes. Now, understandably here, with the New Deal being so revolutionary, and so different, a huge departure from anything that the United States had ever seen before, there's obviously going to be some critics and some challenges here when FDR is putting some of these programs into place. And, you have to remember here that during this Great Depression, America was searching for solutions. And because of this, people, with radical opinions who in better times might have been ignored, were able to capture the attention of the nation. Some were going to make valuable contributions by presenting new ideas for debate. Others seem to just be merely obstructionist complainers, maybe just rabble-rousers, just trying to make trouble. The majority of these people, though, seem to fall into this intermediate category of outspoken people who have many valid objections, a few good ideas, and a love for getting on a soapbox. And we see this taking place in the 1930s, and we really want to talk about three critics of the New Deal specifically. Let's look at the first one, Father Charles Coughlin. Father Charles, he was a Catholic priest. He's from Michigan, and just like FDR with the fireside chats, Father Coughlin began broadcasting his views on the radio in 1930. Now, Coughlin was actually originally a New Deal supporter, but he later became a critic of Roosevelt and a critic of the New Deal because he believed that the NRA, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and the Agricultural Adjustment Act benefited only industry and well-off farmers. His favorite phrase to use was something he liked to call social justice. And Father Coughlin actually charged that Roosevelt was a liar for not nationalizing the banks. That means having the government take over the banks entirely, as Coughlin had believed was Roosevelt's intentions from his speeches prior to taking office. Father Coughlin had the largest radio audience in U.S. history. He had over 40 million listeners. Eventually, though, Father Charles Coughlin, he was his own downfall because he resorted to anti-Semitic and fascist rhetoric. And this is going to turn people off and eventually going to cause his show to be canceled in 1942. The second, and I use this phrase, liberally, the most dangerous critic or opponent of the FDR was a senator from Louisiana named Huey Long, or how he was nicknamed the Kingfish. Huey Long, ultra-progressive senator, promoted an agenda of wealth redistribution that shocked even the liberal Democrats. Long had a program called Share Our Wealth. And he promised to make every man a king by supplying each family with $5,000 at the expense of the wealthy. I mean, he had a progressive background. As governor in Louisiana, he had become very popular with a majority of the electorate due to his raising taxes on the higher income earners to gain funds for schools, hospitals, road improvement, and bridge construction. He also instituted high inheritance taxes on large estates. Like these iron fist, methods really antagonized the wealthy. But even while the wealthy felt like Long had pandered to the worst impulses of greed and envy among the poor in order to gain a voter mandate, he was still really striking a chord with Americans. And in 1935, FDR had said that Huey Long was the most dangerous man in America. Maybe he was the most dangerous man in America to FDR in the New Deal, because FDR saw how much further to the left that Huey Long was and wanted to be with his share of the wealth, or share our wealth, and make every man a king. Huey Long's downfall was that he was assassinated in 1935. The third critic of the New Deal was a retired doctor, Dr. Francis Townsend. And, even being a doctor, Dr. Townsend had been reduced to poverty by the troubles of the Depression. And so Dr. Francis Townsend actually organized over 5 million supporters for what he called his old age revolving pension plan. His plan involved giving $200 a month, which was about twice the average worker's salary, to each senior citizen over the age of 60. This money had to be spent within the month, however, in order to keep it circulating and to prevent hoarding. Which, the lack of consumer spending had been a major stumbling block during the Depression. Townsend's scheme was going to be funded by a national sales tax. However, Townsend's, plan had a couple of drawbacks. Number one, the calculations proved that it would cost the Treasury about half the national income to fund this old age revolving pension plan. And, Roosevelt takes care of, Francis Townsend, in 1935 by enacting or by proposing and getting passed the Social Security Act of 1935, which is actually a retirement pension plan, and we have a Social Security tax that takes money out of our paycheck each month. And so Roosevelt is, I don't know if you would consider him lucky, that he was able to overcome, or able to remain in office and remain as influential as he was, despite the strong rhetoric from critics. All right, so just getting done with the critics. Also looking at women in the New Deal, we had talked a little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt. She's very influential with Franklin Roosevelt, and being that she was like his conscience, she was able to go out to different parts of America and really be able to get people to open up to her, because they felt like she understood the plight of the average American. And so a huge advocate for some of these relief and recovery programs that the New Deal was going to have. And Eleanor Roosevelt will also be a huge civil rights and human rights advocate of the Roosevelt administration as well. Frances Perkin becomes the first female cabinet member, and Mary McLeod Bethune will be the highest ranking African American in the federal government when she serves on Roosevelt's administration. So industry and labor, next. There's a couple of things here that Roosevelt will do to help out industry. The first one will be the NRA, or the National Recovery Administration. Now, the National Recovery Administration was probably the most complex of the New Deal programs, and its goal was to help labor, help industry, and help on the unemployed. And what they try to do here with the NRA in 1933 was to coordinate business and labor to address unemployment for both the short and the long term. The NRA called for self-restraint on the parts of both business and labor. Businesses were to abide by the codes of fair competition. Minimum wages and maximum work hours were established for workers in order to employ a greater number of people. Labor was encouraged to use collective bargaining. Now, the National Recovery Administration program was expensive for industries, and workers who already had a job found their net pay actually reduced because they were restricted in the number of hours they could work. In addition, the labor felt its bargain impact blunted in not being able to threaten to strike. So after a warm reception, this NRA plan began to flounder as each group felt like it was being asked to sacrifice too much. The NRA's semi-voluntary nature made it easy for individuals to cheat on the rules when they felt like it was unfairly burdened. So while the NRA I guess successful start, and you would see industry or companies, they would show that they were complying with some of these NRA voluntary rules and regulations by putting like a blue eagle on the front of their factory or their business. People would hold parades for the NRA. The Philadelphia Eagles were actually named for the NRA. You'll see that it slowly becomes unpopular because once again, it's they both sides, labor and industry, are feeling like it's asking them to sacrifice too much. And then finally, in the Schechter case, or the sick chicken case, the Supreme Court ruled that not only had Congress overstepped its bounds by delegating its legislative authority to the executive branch, but also that the federal government did not have the jurisdiction for regulating local businesses that were not engaged in interstate activity. So the NRA is going to be struck down by the Supreme Court too. Now remember these New Deal programs and how they're being ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, because this is going to come back in 1937. So a companion to the NRA was the Public Works Administration. This is also aimed at unemployment relief and economic recovery. This is going to be headed up by Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes. And the PWA is going to pursue tens of thousands of public work projects. The Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River, which provided water for irrigation and hydroelectric power for the region. The PWA and later the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. The success of these programs lay in the fact that the government was much more successful as a contractor for work than as a mediator between business and labor, as it had tried to be with the NRA. And you saw, like with the PWA and the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, this is when you see, like I said, dams being built, highways being constructed, bridges being built, public school buildings or public buildings being built, ditches being dug, trees being planted. When we went to Stagfield Plantation and the slave narratives, that was part of the Works Progress Administration. The government would hire out artists to paint, for commission, actors to go on traveling theater troupes, stage plays and performances around the country. So just trying to put people back to work. That's the goal of the Public Works Administration and the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. We will also see, I don't know, I just had to put this in there, that 1933 we also saw the 21st Amendment pass, ending prohibition. And we really want to look at, when we're looking at industry and labor, it's all dealing with the goal of pump priming, jobs programs, outright welfare. But even though this is all in place, unemployment is still going to be high in 1935, and many people had exhausted every resource. And so the mood of the country, even though Roosevelt was doing all these things and trying everything to get people back on their feet, the mood of the country was still desperate. And Roosevelt felt like that these previous programs had not gone far enough, and that he wanted to begin another round of reforms that sometimes people call the Second New Deal. And this is when we see more people being put back to work, and we see more efforts at relief and recovery and reform during the Second New Deal. We see Roosevelt go a little bit further. This is the Second New Deal. This is when the WPA comes into play. This is when the Social Security Act comes into play. This is when we also start to see things like Well, I'm running out of time here, and it seems to me that one of my slides at the end are a little bit out of order. So I'll get back to us picking up with the Second New Deal.